So I'm going to just quickly summarize what our panelists had said in the first session, and then we'll continue on. And feel free to ask questions. Like I said earlier this morning, this is going to be a fairly unstructured kind of a panel discussion. We have to follow up on a couple of things here, and then I'm going to throw it open to the audience for questions, and please feel free to ask any one or more panelists to respond on the questions. So when we were here earlier this morning, the panelists actually identified some of the key challenges and opportunities in pharmaceutical sales. Particularly, they talked about how innovation is affecting both the R&D, but also how innovation is needed in selling and sales management, which is the key interest of this conference and some of the students who are here. They also discussed how costs and pricing pressure, the economic value of selling, of building relationships, is one of the key takeaways that have come out so far from what we've discussed. So I'm going to continue with the discussion. We started talking about how consultative selling is evolving and how training and compensation is changing in the pharmaceutical industry based on this consultative selling. We heard from all of the panelists, but we're going to hear from Mr. Cliff Moore, who's coming from the buyer's side, and he's going to tell us a little more in terms of what his experience is when he meets the pharmaceutical reps and experiences consultative selling from the buyer's side. Cliff?
So I guess to start off with, what I'd like to do is sort of describe to you a little bit about how the pharmacy works. So maybe to give you a little bit of an insight will help you as you approach the marketplace. And Rich had kind of talked a little bit about giving out free goods and pads and pens and stuff like that. Well, there's something that we say in the pharmacy that the most expensive piece of equipment in a hospital is actually a physician's pen. And the rationale behind that is not because there's a pharmaceutical company behind it necessarily, but because of the prescribing power that the physician has. So we in the pharmacy then try to approach that kind of realm. What can we do to influence the prescriber? So pharmacy has changed over time. What we see now is that there's more of a clinical presence in pharmacy departments. Actually, not to get into a long story, but pharmacists now have to go through a 6-year program. They graduate with a doctorate in pharmacy, and they are more clinically oriented as opposed to, say, the 5-year graduates were years ago. So there's now within a pharmacy department a clinical staff that's made up of essentially doctorates of pharmacy, and their main role is to round with physicians, essentially evaluate patients, and to have some impact on that prescribing power. So that's where we try to make our impact, is we feel as if we can influence the physician as they're prescribing. It's much easier than trying to go back and get them to change their decision. So again, from a sales perspective, arming the pharmacist with the appropriate information that they need when they're out speaking with the physicians is something that you have to think about. We, again, kind of going back to that team concept, are going to be sort of your front line, sales force, if you will, almost. If you can get and influence the pharmacist. I think, Sudha, you spoke earlier when you started the conference about physicians being less involved in the whole marketing aspect of sales. And I think that you're going to see that you're going to need to focus more on pharmacists and particularly the clinical staff and trying to influence them, because they're the ones that are going to have the greatest impact. Not only are they actually rounding with physicians, but now we've got the ability to sign collaborative practice agreements with physicians. So physicians will actually agree to let pharmacists prescribe for them. So pharmacists are a factor, obviously, now in healthcare. They've always been more so now, but certainly I think you have to consider the impact that the clinical pharmacist is going to have on the industry.
Sudha, I'll just take a second, and I want to re-emphasize the point Cliff just made, especially for the audience here. When you go out there and have this, if you have this perception that the physician can write something, and then you have the authority to go sell that product, or you have the buy-in, that's not true anymore. especially in a hospital setting. He holds the key for everything. So you can have every doctor supporting it. If Cliff doesn't support, it's not happening. So it's becoming all the more pronounced now than it has ever been.
Rich, I know you wanted to add something.
Which reinforces, excuse me, account selling
Account selling.
and all the stakeholders, which include more than the physician, but include the pharmacist, et cetera.
Yeah.
It just reinforces that.
And we probably didn't really talk about the selling cycle, which is a concept that I think is important for people to understand. You know, back in the 90s, you could walk in, I could talk to Dr. Cliff, he would say, okay, that sounds good. He could write that product immediately. The selling cycle was complete. The selling cycle today is much, much longer. It's much more comprehensive. And what you just heard is part of the selling cycle, right? It's first of all, understanding who the key decision makers are. Second of all, being able to provide much more than just product information, right? Pharmacoeconomic comparative effectiveness outcomes. And then third is to be able to impact and influence the decision makers along the line, providing them with what they need so they can make the decision for the product and the service that you're bringing. That selling cycle is much longer. And that's why we've had to transition and transform our incentive programs. And I think sometimes Wall Street doesn't really understand that because they still hit pharmaceutical companies with these ridiculous expectations and projections for sales when a drug launches. And it's just not like that anymore. It takes much longer for that to build.
Thank you so much. Rich, you wanted to, on the compensation side, you wanted to add something?
Just quickly on the comp model, we had a couple of comments around that. I would just say that you've seen one compensation plan, you've seen one compensation plan. There's still a variety of plans out there that may be higher weighted to salary component versus the bonus component. Some will say they're more higher on the bonus component versus the salary. Not so much so these days, but still there's that mix. And as Greg said, some are going on customer satisfaction, which hasn't caught on quite that greatly. Right. I mean, we're in a business, right? In the business of medicine, from the industry side as well as the healthcare system side. But there's just a variety, because I know that compensation's important, right? I mean, that's one of the reasons, not the only, but one of the reasons we work.
Thank you.
And some of the companies actually do give stock options too to salespeople in addition to the bonus. So
Right.
not everyone, but many do.
And maybe to demonstrate with some real world information on what Cliff was saying, Rayburn Pharmaceuticals has a product at the FDA being reviewed, and as we're doing our market research, people say, well, boy, who'd you go out and talk to? Probably talk to physicians and nurses and specialists, and yeah, it's 1A and 1 AA. Physicians and payers, pharmacists. I want to know what Cliff thinks about our product. Where will it be reimbursed, on the medical side or the prescription drug side? You know, if you don't have a J code, you only got a miscellaneous J code at launch, what does that mean in terms of reimbursement? So it's much more beyond just reinforcing this total account process than just going and calling a doctor and say, hey, can I buy you a cup of coffee and a few donuts?
Sure, no.
And one of the things I'd just add to that too is that there's also a change in the medical staff mix, I'll say. You know, typically years ago, you'd go to your primary care physician, he'd admit you to the hospital, then he would come and visit you and order tests or whatever he had to do, medications, whatever it was. Now there are hospitalists within the pharmacy, within the hospital. So no longer, or very rarely, do you actually see your primary care physician in the hospital setting. There are physicians there that your primary care physician is going to admit to. So you may experience even a different physician once you get into a hospital setting as well. So you've got, as a sales force, you've got to deal with not only the primary care physicians, but now this new group of hospitalists.
Exactly.
I would now like to throw the audience this panel discussion open to the audience. Feel free to ask some questions panelists are here to respond. Can we get the mic? Yes, please. So please introduce yourself, get the mic, and get started.
My name is Jennifer, and I've been a pharmacy technician for 5 years, and I noticed that when the reps come in to sell a product, it's always at a bad time. And I just wonder, why don't they just try to make appointments usually either earlier or, mid-afternoon where the pharmacists aren't busy so they can really talk to the reps? Usually the pharmacists are so wrapped up, they just want to get out of their face. They just want to leave. They take their vouchers, they put them to the side, and we forget about them until like 6 or 7 months later when an actual prescriber has, given them a prescription for that medication. Especially if it's a new one, I've noticed that the doctor or the pharmacist, he doesn't remember it or he would forget it until, a rep would call them maybe and suggest, have you been using vouchers? Which has been, helpful lately.
Are you in a retail pharmacy?
Yeah, retail.
Okay. So, I'll just take that for initially anyway. Typically, a retail setting is significantly different than a hospital setting. Not for anything specific, but they're even licensed differently through the Board of Pharmacy. But realistically, what happens is there's a larger staff typically in a hospital environment, and people have responsibilities that are a little bit more specific than in a retail establishment. So in a hospital setting, it is more common that a rep would actually make an appointment and try to be a little bit more coordinated in their presentation. In a retail environment, I think it's a little bit different because typically, the owner of the pharmacy or the pharmacists that are working there might not really have any true ownership in the business other than the fact that they want to do the best that they can do for their patients. So I think it's a little bit of a different environment in the retail setting.
It is, and I would agree 100% with Cliff. I would say, though, it goes basics of consultative selling. Profile your customer. When do they want to see you? I'm having a flashback, right? Cleveland Heights, Ohio. Dr. Boulware, huge primary care physician, had an antidepressant. If you wanted to see him, 7 a.m. Tuesday morning. Guess who was there 7 a.m. Tuesday morning? Right? And he also wanted, don't show me your brochure. I want clinical studies. So I had 7 a.m., clinical studies, Dr. Boulware. Same with, so it goes back to that customer profile. It goes back to what are your customer needs? I'm too busy right now. You're here at noon on a Monday in a retail pharmacy. It's craziness. Absolutely. You need to, it goes back to this consultative selling, customer profiling, targeting customer needs, and then filling those needs as best you can. And that's an easy one.
The best reps, the best reps understand that, right? So if you just go with because we've earned that problem ourselves in the industry, right? When we are talking to our sales professionals, we have mapped out all the features and benefits and key things about the product, who the audience is, who the prescribers are, where to go in the hospital, what physician practices to go to. Guess what the last thing on the list is? It's the retail pharmacy. And many companies do a horrible job in retail pharmacy and just completely ignore it, quite frankly, and hope that the prescriber will carry the day when that prescription gets to the pharmacy. The reality is, though, that retail pharmacists have much more influence than that. And to your point, we need to be asking that question, like Rich says, we need to go into CVS, Walgreens, Rite Aid, or whatever that independent pharmacy is and say, what would be a good time for me to come in and review diabetes with you? Because guess what? The retail pharmacist has now got, a minute clinic. They've got nurses. They're doing vaccines. They're treating people. They're checking blood glucoses. So, again, it all goes back to what we talked about earlier. What are those competencies we talked about in understanding your customer and the patient flow? Where does that patient go? How am I supporting that patient journey. And if you do that, retail pharmacy is going to be key. So we can learn from you on that, right?
Yeah, and your feedback here is kind of market research. It's a customer feedback. And it highlights the fact that the training needs are going to be different. Now, when it comes to specialty selling, to Cliff's point, a typical specialty sales rep knows account management, knows team selling. They're much more in tune with seeking appointments, making a case, kind of structuring their day. A primary care sales rep, for example, a retail pharmacy is another list. I'm going to do it while I'm trying to get home or trying to get to a doctor's appointment. Let me just stop by. And that is changing. That will change because the role of the pharmacist is evolving. Things that are happening in a pharmacy that didn't happen before are happening now. So in the industry is listening, I can tell you that. It is just taking time. But it's happening more so in many other countries around the world where pharmacist in a retail setting actually does a lot of prescription writing. And most likely in many of the emerging markets. And so they are actually building pharmacist-focused field forces to cater to their needs. So, but your point is well taken.
We have about 10 minutes. We'll, go through as many questions as we can. So, Sander?
Yeah, we just heard a major trend. Cliff, your trend, which will get even bigger, of having pharmacists write the RXs within the hospital. And under the Affordable Care Act, that trend will go way, way up. So that's a major trend. My question, I guess, to Rich and I guess I have two questions for Rich and Greg. Can you help us understand the difference of a sales pitch to the hospital pharmacist to get her or him to write the prescription vis-a-vis your pitch to the physician? What is the difference? Do you focus on just price with the hospital pharmacist who's writing the RX? Efficacy? Is it the same pitch that you would make to a physician? That's question one. And Rich, I don't know whether you covered this before, but can you explain to the audience what a J code is? Mm-hmm. So everyone gets it vis-a-vis a new product launch? Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
I'll start, and then Rich, you can take that. So I think, and we've touched upon a few of these points. Again, we talked about the importance of, for instance, hospital pharmacy, and the hospital pharmacist has to take into account a plethora of things, right? First of all, what's already on formulary? Second of all, again, what's the comparative effectiveness of the product? What are the outcomes? What are the pharmacoeconomic benefits? So cost, because a pharmacy has a budget, right? Versus when we're talking to a specialist or a physician, the first thing they ask is what's the efficacy of the product? And then what's the safety of the product? What clinical trials can you show me that actually shows that this product is superior to what I might be using? All of those things are also considered by the pharmacist. And I think that, but they have a broader responsibility, and that's kind of the theme of probably what you're hearing here, is that pharmacy is no longer somebody standing at a bench counting pills by fives. They have a huge responsibility, and they're a major part now of the medical team. I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, I think it's evolved, Sander, where there was a difference in the past, safety, efficacy and safety, physician, pricing, safety and efficacy, and pricing to the pharmacist. But that has come more and more together, that as part of that healthcare team, the physician and pharmacist both need to know safety, efficacy, pharmacoeconomics, the cost of the product, the value of the product, health economic studies. So in my mind, there really isn't a difference, and particularly when you think the doctor I'm calling on in the office, Dr. Sander, who works for pharmacist Cliff's hospital, oh, by the way, they're owned by the same integrated delivery network. And they're all getting that message of health economics, affordable care, higher quality of care, cost effective, et cetera. So I really see them, they're together, to be quite honest with you.
There is one aspect, just building on the point, Rich, you were making, is in the past we thought of physicians as influencers who influenced other hospitals, other peers. But this peer-to-peer influence is happening at the pharmacist level too, in their setting as well, where they're influencing pharmacists in other hospitals. And plus, when we are going out to the pharmacists, they typically have their own influence across the hospital systems. So there is more to it than just cost aspects.
Yep.
Well, if I could just add just one thing to that, and I think just from a pharmacist perspective, and obviously this can vary too, but I think that, I think the tendency is going to be for physicians to diagnose, pharmacists to prescribe. I think historically, the pharmacist, basically their entire education is understanding the impact and effects of medications. So when we go into a patient's room, we're thinking about not only the drug that's being prescribed, but the drugs that the patient's already on, and any kind of side effects, interactions, and things like that. So the pharmacist is going to have, I think, a better understanding of all of those kind of things. I think it also, especially in a hospital setting, we deal obviously with a lot of oral medications, but we deal more with injectable medications. And so not only do you need to know the side effects, the interactions, but you also need to know stability, sterility kind of issues, and whether or not the product, you're going to be able to get it to the patient in a timely manner. So there's a lot of those kind of things to consider as well.
J-code, now just really high level, reimbursement we talked about. Physicians, hospitals want to be reimbursed for the products they use, for the procedures they use. So there are different coding systems that are available out there that are utilized. From the drug side, and these are drugs that are used in the outpatient type facilities a physician will use, or clinic will use and bill for, they often require a J code so that they are able to be identified and reimbursed appropriately. And then on the procedure side, you'll hear the terminology of CPT code is for procedures. And then, ICD-9, which is going to ICD-10, is the diagnosis. So you got, what am I diagnosed with? What products from the outpatient setting might they use that need to be reimbursed, J-code, and what procedure am I doing regarding the diagnosis?
We can take one last question. Can we get the mic, please? Take one last question. We'll wrap up the session, but you'll have time when we wrap at the end, during the break from 12:15, we'll have the panelists here. Feel free to walk around, talk to the panelists, and then again later on once we wrap up this. Looks like we have a really interesting topic, but just not enough time to address all of them. But please go ahead.
My question is more on the job search aspect. I guess we mentioned that the Mercks and other companies are letting go of their experienced salespeople. So now those experienced salespeople are in the market. How do recent graduates compete in the market for the same jobs that those experienced salespeople are looking for as well? How do we get our foot in the door? What is the benefit of a company hiring a recent graduate? So I guess this is going to be a question that a lot of us are wondering.
Right. Well, it's a great question, because that's what you're all going to college for, right? To get out and to get a great job and career path. One, you have to really be targeted. What companies are you going for? If you're right out of college, probably going to Merck or BMS or J&J or Pfizer isn't the place right now. As they downsize their primary care sales forces, which you would be an entry into, and they're upsizing to a degree their specialty sales forces, which you're just not going to be qualified for at this point in your career. Okay, so when it's targeting those companies, so it's companies with primary care type products, It's companies that value, they're looking for an entry level because they want to provide a level of training to you with that. And also, let's be honest, your compensation level as a recent graduate compared to a 10-year specialty pharmaceutical sales representative who's delivered results every year is quite different. So some organizations, because of the nature of their product, it doesn't need to have a high level of experience, but it's someone who has the ability to learn, someone who has the ability to build relationships, someone has the ability to demonstrate they've planned and can work on their own and be motivated.
Anybody wants to add a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I'll jump in here. I think Rich makes a good point. On sales organizations, there are companies out there called contract sales organizations. You actually work with one, didn't you? So contract sales organizations are just that. They're groups of professionals that will pull together and train sales representatives for specific contracts with different companies. And those people may be folks that previously were in sales and maybe they're having children now and they want to cut back their hours, but they still want to stay involved in sales. They might be new to the industry. And so there's a lot of different reasons why folks are involved in contract sales. The key is find out who the contract sales companies are in your area and begin to talk to those folks. Another thing I would suggest is that look at First Word. First Word is an e-publication. You can Google it. It's purely about the pharmaceutical industry. It talks about who's doing what, who's getting bigger, who's getting smaller, and you'll start to see who's launching products, who's not launching products. Because when companies are launching products, they need to hire people. Now, you may not be able to have your foot in the door right away, but I think, again, by working and getting some level of sales experience, either in another industry or through a contract sales company, you could potentially do that. If it's enough to get your foot in the door for an interview, you might be able to get a preceptorship or an internship. And once your foot is in the door, it's all about who you know. And my Sicilian mother always said, it's not what you know, it's who you know. I don't know why. The Sicilians are big on that. But, so, you know, again, I just think, and then don't leave out, if you're interested in a particular company that sells a product in a special area. I've said diabetes a few times. Maybe it's heart failure. Maybe it's women's health. Go on the internet, find out the local chapters of the organizations like the American Diabetes Association, American Heart Association, and go to a meeting. Go to one of their gala events. Go in and introduce yourself and start talking to people, because it's all about networking with people like up here, and that's ultimately how you get in.
You know, I would just mention three top-of-mind things. One is set no boundaries for yourself. You know, be willing to do what you're passionate about, anywhere and everywhere. So, you know, you have to target, but don't set limits. It's not necessary that you have to go to Pfizer to succeed. It could be some other company that gives you a starting point to build from. So don't have those inhibitions and blocks in your mind that, oh God, I have a colleague of mine who got into Pfizer and I'm working for this and the other person got into this. Don't have those inhibitions. Go after what you're passionate about. That's one. Second is, think of this as a journey. If you're passionate about sales, think of this as a journey. And a journey, there is no destination. There is a destination finally, but it's a journey. It's a lifelong journey of improving as a professional wherever it takes you. And third is network, network, network. And networking doesn't mean being on LinkedIn. It doesn't finish there. It doesn't mean being on Facebook, doesn't finish there. It has become a norm these days that everybody's on LinkedIn, everybody's on Facebook. It's good. But finally people get hired if they build credibility and trust with people over a period of time. You know, we always look out for people whom we know will deliver. they are the kind of people, anytime we have someone we have looking in for, he's the one or she's the one I pick up the phone and say, come on over. And that is what you need. So three things. One is set no inhibitions. Two, think of this as a journey. It's a long road to go. You have many years. If you believe in yourself, if you trust in your passion, there is going to be a destination, a good one. And third, network, network, network. It is built over a lifetime and it never ends.
Thank you. So we're going to take the last 30 seconds for each of the panelists to identify what are some of the things that we've not been able to address, or what are some of the things that even the industry is still struggling with, answers that you would want, maybe research on it, something you would want answers, given us answers. We want the last 30 seconds for that, and then we'll switch to the second answer.
I'm going to start with Rudy.
So if I understand the challenges that they...
Yes, that you still are not sure how we're going to address this going forward.
I think frankly how we can improve health and sell more.
Okay.
Frankly, that is the biggest challenge, because every day we are under tremendous pressure to deliver. So it's not only the salespeople. I think all across the company there is a pressure to improve health. And I think numbers mean a lot, but the focus should not shift away from the fact that we are here for patient care. We are here to help our customers do their jobs better. We are here to help save costs. We are here to build a sustainable model as a partner of the healthcare system. With that in mind, however we can improve upon that is the biggest challenge. Any and everything is good. Okay. And I think that finally is going to result in higher sales, better productivity, and the capitalist system keeps working.
Okay, thank you. Cliff, your 30 seconds.
Yeah, I would agree with Rudy. I think, trying to form those partnerships is certainly key to our success moving forward. The one thing that I do want to just mention, though, because we haven't talked about it today, is there's another, we've talked about a number of different customers, and the one that we've left off is the group purchasing organizations. There's a whole realm of companies out there that negotiate pricing for pharmaceuticals and probably a lot of other products. But they are also drivers of product in the market and need to be considered because they are a very strong force.
Thank you. Greg?
I guess just kind of following along the theme of what Rudy was talking about. So how do we move this industry from where it started, where it was one of the highest, most sought-after ethical positions that you could be in, to a position now where everybody thinks, as a sales rep, you're only in it for the money, and that the reputation has gone down. I mean, how do we take the ethical standards, our patient care, and the desire to help patients, and how do we ramp this back up again? I think there's a great opportunity there, guys. I really do. And if you really care, to the point about the journey, it's going to be a journey, but I really think that this is one of the most pivotal times in our history as a country. And we need people that are dedicated to doing the right thing, not just trying to get around something. So for me, that is what I want to see. Because guess what? Soon I'm going to be one of the elderly in the hospitals. And you're going to be taking care of me. So I really hope that you'll be able to do that.
I just went through my CPR course, so if you go on stage,
I have had a couple of chest pains.
I am ready. I just want you to know that, okay? Seriously.
I don't want him pounding on my chest.
I think I also heard, Sudha, what is the challenge for the university? And I think the challenge for the university is you heard a lot of stuff. We didn't even touch on, we mentioned some really, really big things. Cliff brought in GPOs there at the end, right? And if you don't have a dictionary on biopharma acronyms, we gotta get one, right? Okay. But how will the university take this and prepare these young adults in your program to be prepared to enter that, and to be prepared that I'm going on that interview with a biopharmaceutical company as a sales representative, and someone mentions J code or GPO or reimbursement, or pharmacists, hospitalists. They're like, yeah, here's what I know about that, or here's how I would handle that. I think that's a challenge.
Thank you. With this, we're going to wrap up the first panel discussion. I'd like to thank each of the panelists, Rich Kelly, Greg Moisan, Cliff Moore, and Rudy Sharan for participating. Thank you all for attending.